Yes, folks, the meat and potatoes, and in the introduction I talked about Mark Cavendish, cyclist, but interestingly the catalyst for this episode today was actually a question I received from an athlete that I coach. I got it last week, and it was born out of a question actually originating from his viewing of the Olympic swimming trials, which of course the Olympics are coming up very, very soon. So I'm going to read out the question, and it will give you some context of why I decided to build this show today. So the question is this: I was watching the Olympic swimming trials and was awed by some of the returning athletes that are making their second or third Olympic Games. And it made me think about the mindset of a winner. They seem to be so tough, seemingly calm, and there are so many stories embedded in the navigation of this year's trials around comebacks. Is there anything that us mere mortals can learn from and apply to our lives? Well, it turns out there is. You don't need to be an elite athlete to draw from their approach or the traits of their mindset. The question is so compelling that I decided to build all of today's show around this. So let's get to it. We're going to break it up into a couple of parts here. But first, in part one, we want to talk about sustained high performance and specifically high performers. I'm sure as a listener, we all can share in a common set of aspirations, if you want to call it that. I assume that we want to feel good. We want to be able to bring our best to every day, to the things that are most important to us. And of course, we hope for great staying power, resilience, ability to handle anything that is thrown our way along the journey. Consider this: when you feel good, you bring better. And when you put your energy into the most valuable aspects of success, you're going to yield bigger results. And when you have the ability to stay the course and handle any setbacks or unexpected stresses, you're going to be equipped for long-term success. And for me, this is sustained high performance. Imagine that you have this every day. You bring it every day. Great traits, great energy, bringing your best. But now imagine being the team where every member of that team has this and brings it every single day. I can only imagine what that would do to productivity, output, and results. For me, this is sustained high performance. I've worked with many of the world's elite Ironman athletes. I've also worked with leading executives from major organizations. And the pattern that I've observed is that the highest performers, the folks with staying power, longevity, that go on to create greatness, display a common set of traits and characteristics that make up a high-performance mindset. It's no wonder that I used to say, coach the pros like CEOs and the CEOs like pros. So these traits include various things. Let me just run them off really quickly. Number one, grit and resilience. Number two, driven by purpose, really understanding their why. Number three, they always have a passion for the process. They tend to be more process-driven than outcome-driven. They have a quest to drive a reduction of the complex into simple and actionable, focusing their energy and prioritizing the actions on the important stuff that's going to drive results. Universally, they tend to be really coachable. They have high adaptability and resilience. They develop a positive relationship with stress and pressure, realizing that that is necessary, a privilege almost, something that is going to drive them to growth. They also have a great T-shaped perspective, as I like to call it. In other words, a keen ability to come out of the day-to-day weeds and come up for perspective, as well as reflection. What have they done well? Where do they need to improve? And universally, they value mechanisms of support and accountability, often thriving within a team mindset. So these are all things that I'm sure you've heard before, you could perhaps identify with. But if we pause and we consider that list, if you can develop and hone these traits, surely you're equipped for a performance journey, no matter where you're placing your energy, no matter what is important to you, athletics or anything else in the world. In other words, these are a toolkit in a way to maximize what you bring to the table. Your intelligence, your physical gifts, your commitment and work ethic towards that goal or journey. Now, world-class athletes, they develop these traits, and they're fundamental to anyone becoming a champion. And leading executives hone and develop these traits, and they end up being critical to becoming a highly effective leader. But we shouldn't just shine the light on the brain, on the mindset. We also, I think, need to not forget the physical part of this. And these traits are, of course, fundamental to the equation. But over the last 20 plus years of coaching high performers, I've observed that it's impossible to consistently put these traits into action if you're existing in a world of suppressed energy, health, lethargy. So unless you can bring your best physical self, you're going to be ill-equipped to actually maximize these critical traits consistently and predictably. So what do I mean by this, by putting this into action? Well, let's think about athletes for a second. If you are, say, really overtrained, in other words, you're working very, very hard, you're extremely fit, but you're existing in a fog of fatigue, it's impossible then for you to bring many of these traits into action because your body is just suppressed. Now, I'm not sure whether it was General Patton or Vince Lombardi, but the quote that you might have heard, "Fatigue makes cowards of us all," that bubbles up to the surface when we think about this. If you're tired, chronically tired, whether it's from too much training, underfueling, a lack of recovery, whatever it is, you might be really fit as an athlete, but you're not fresh. And that severely limits your ability to bring the necessary traits, the elite mindset, to help you go on to be a champion. Now that's the athletes, but now let's talk about the business professionals. So if you're trying to bring your best in the workplace, well, you might be really tough, committed. You might be willing to do what is ever necessary, pulling all-nighters so that you get the job done, so that you can fulfill your role to the max. And there's a lot of people that will put a lot of stuff aside to get to the goal in business. But ultimately, what I see is if you failed to prioritize your own health and well-being, and you decide not to prioritize and consistently commit to some of the key habits and processes that go through to help process stress, such as movement, proper sleep, quality eating, and you are too walking around in suppressed health or at least a fog of fatigue, it will undoubtedly, and all research shows it, suppress your ability to deploy these same traits. In other words, your energy will be lower, your cognitive function will be compromised, and whether you're aware of it or not, you will be battling your body relative to what you could potentially feel like. And so in other words, in order to hone, improve, and develop these key traits that make up an elite mindset, I believe that first, all of us, no matter where we're trying to show up in life, first need to build a platform of physical readiness. And so while today's show is, yes, shining the light on these elite traits, we need to remember that they are in lockstep with your physical well-being, a performance-based layer, as I like to call it. You cannot unlock and separate them. You can't have one without the other. And so in part 2, we're going to dig into these traits a little bit and understand how they're developed and how they're important across all aspects of performance.